U.S. Commerce Department is hiking anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber to 20.56%.
This is another unjustified tariff. You can expect us to fight against it, and you can expect us to take specific steps to protect those workers.
Ontario has just made a bold move, halting its entire supply of lumber to the United States. The reason? Washington's sky-high import tariffs. And the consequences are proving to be nothing short of severe. The reality is simple. The US needs to import wood. It simply doesn't produce enough on its own. Every year, Canada exports about 28 million cubic meters of lumber to the United States, roughly 1/3 of what the American construction industry needs. So when that steady flow is suddenly cut off, the cost of building a home in the US skyrockets by anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 per project. That financial blow doesn't hit Ontario. It lands squarely on the shoulders of American families and businesses. This shortage is more than a supply issue. It directly threatens the American dream of home ownership and forces contractors to search for alternative materials at much higher costs. The US housing market, already strained by high interest rates, now faces yet another destabilizing shock. Meanwhile, Ontario isn't scrambling. It's simply redirecting its lumber to willing buyers in Europe, Asia, and other global markets. This entire episode drives home a crucial point. When Washington imposes punitive tariffs and drags trade relationships into conflict, it's American consumers who end up paying the price. Canada, particularly Ontario, can pivot. The US? Not so much. Tens of thousands of extra dollars are now being added to the cost of building a home, all because of a trade dispute. Let's be clear. Canada isn't dumping lumber into the US market. That narrative doesn't hold up. The reality is that Ontario has made a conscious choice to cut off the flow. And frankly, it's a tragic outcome caused by one thing: tariffs pushed to an unreasonable level. The US slapped a 35% tariff on Canadian lumber. 35%. That's not a mild adjustment. It's a gut punch to a trade relationship that's been a cornerstone for decades. Ontario's response was simple and direct. If the US wants to play tough, then Ontario will answer in kind. No more lumber. It's like having a neighbor who's always borrowing sugar, only for you to finally lock the jar and watch how they cope without it. Americans are about to feel the full impact of that decision. To put things into perspective, Ontario doesn't just ship a few logs across the border for fun. It sends about 28 million cubic meters of lumber to the US annually. Nearly 1/3 of all the 2x4s, beams, and planks used in American construction. That's enough wood to build 16 massive Empire State Buildings every single year. And this supply isn't sporadic. It's consistent, reliable, month after month. Now that supply has vanished, and the American construction industry is feeling the pain. The forest industry is a vital part of Canada's economy, and Ontario is now taking steps to support its lumber sector by pivoting to other markets, including those in Europe and Asia. The market isn't blind. Lumber prices have always fluctuated, but in early 2025, futures surged to $650 per 1,000 board feet. Some experts warn that prices could hit $765 if Ontario holds the line. For contractors, this isn't a minor price adjustment. It's a budget-breaking disaster. You can be resourceful in many ways, but you can't build a home on good intentions and wishful thinking. And this could be just the beginning. If the situation drags on, what's now a strained housing market could become a full-blown crisis, the worst in decades. The US could try to import more from other countries like Germany or Sweden, but none of them can come close to replacing the volume lost from Canada. Let's not kid ourselves. For decades, the US has leaned heavily on Canadian lumber, like a college student surviving on instant noodles. Even when American sawmills are running full tilt, they only meet about 70% of domestic demand. The rest, roughly 25% to 30%, comes from Canada. Ontario is a huge part of that supply chain. When it pulls out, the ripple effects are immediate. Empty shelves at hardware stores, half-finished projects, and frustrated contractors stuck with no materials and rising costs. Lumber futures have jumped again, following the US announcement of an additional 25% tariff on top of the already existing 14.5%. To grasp the scale of this relationship, look at the numbers. In 2023, the US imported 28.1 million cubic meters of Canadian softwood lumber. The total trade value? About $58 billion a year. That's not small change. That's a cornerstone of the construction economy. But Washington raised tariffs anyway, seemingly expecting Canada to keep shipping lumber without any pushback. That's not how trade works. Even when American mills are at full capacity, they can only produce about 30 to 35 million cubic meters a year. That leaves a massive gap and no quick way to fill it. Trees don't grow overnight. Lumber isn't a fast food item you can produce on demand. From planting to finished product takes years, and no tariff can change that. The idea of replacing Canada's supply with alternatives from places like Germany, Sweden, or Chile sounds reasonable until you see the math. Germany might offer 2 million cubic meters, Sweden around 1 million, and Chile a bit more. Even combined, that doesn't come close to matching the 28 million cubic meters Ontario used to provide every year, and that's the bottleneck. With Canada out of the equation, the US is left with very few options, and even fewer affordable ones. And that's not even considering the fact that lumber from overseas has to travel halfway around the world, pushing costs even higher and causing major delays in delivery. Sure, go ahead and try to find a replacement supplier, but here's the irony. The US keeps telling itself, we can meet our own lumber needs. It's a familiar claim, one that resurfaces every few years. But just do the math. Without Canadian supply, that claim falls apart, about as fast as a house built with cheap, low-quality wood. Ontario's decision has simply pulled back the curtain, exposing a hard truth. This so-called self-sufficiency isn't nearly as strong as Washington would like to believe. When tariffs go up or supply is cut off, who ends up paying the price? It's not Canada, it's the American families who just want to build a home. They're the ones hit the hardest. According to the National Association of Home Builders, lumber alone accounts for around 35% of the cost of building a new house. So, when lumber prices spike, what do you think happens to the price of that dream home? It shoots up. Projections suggest that by 2027, the cost of building a single-family home could increase by an additional $10,000 to $14,000. For many buyers, especially first-time homeowners, this is another major obstacle, on top of already painful interest rates. And this isn't just a future risk. Temporary price surges have already added between $5,000 and $8,000 to home construction costs. If the situation deteriorates further, we could be looking at a worst-case scenario. Construction costs rising by an additional $20,000 to $30,000 in 2025 alone. Imagine saving for years to build your home, only to be told you now need an extra $30,000 just because of a change in trade policy. That's not a minor setback. That's a devastating blow to the dream of home ownership. Canada is the #1 customer for many US states, 28 of them to be exact, relying on trade with Ontario to support their own industries. And yet, those very states are now facing the consequences of policies made in Washington. The National Association of Home Builders has issued a formal warning. Construction costs across the US could jump another 10% to 15%. That's not theoretical, it's already being felt on the ground. In California, where housing prices are already at crisis levels, this feels like another hammer blow. In Texas, where construction drives growth and new projects appear almost daily, the cost surge is choking development. Meanwhile, Ontario isn't just sitting quietly in the background. The province is playing its own hand, hinting at export quotas. In other words, Ontario may not just stop at reducing exports, it may choose exactly how much lumber the US receives. That's more than restricting supply. That's strategic leverage. And let's not forget how this situation escalated. US tariffs went from 14.54% in 2024 to 20.56% by early 2025, and now stand at a staggering 35%. At that point, it's no longer a tariff. It's effectively a trade blockade. So when Ontario starts exercising more control over how much lumber leaves the province, it's not just retaliation. It's a survival strategy in a trade relationship that no longer feels fair. President Trump's tariffs have taken direct aim at Canada, specifically Ontario. Communities across the province are already feeling the pain. Families are worried. But Ontario isn't stuck in the past. The province is transforming its industry, shifting away from exporting raw logs like it did in the 1950s, and instead focusing on high-value, finished wood products. We're talking about engineered wood, modular prefabricated homes, kitchen cabinetry, furniture, and more. These products not only command higher prices, they're also less likely to be hit by tariffs, and the strategy is already delivering results. In 2020, Canada's exports of processed wood increased by 12%, while raw lumber exports declined. This shift is no accident. It's a well-calculated move. Ontario is earning more per shipment and becoming less vulnerable to international trade disputes. It's like moving from selling bags of plain sugar to offering luxury chocolate. The base ingredient might be similar, but the profits are on an entirely different level. Yes, US tariffs have reduced Canada's share of the market, from 30% to about 23 to 24%. But Europe has stepped in to fill the gap. The US is still importing about 30% of its lumber, but now around 7% is coming from Europe instead of Canada. What's remarkable is how simple and effective Ontario's new approach is. The province is diversifying its export markets, targeting Asia-Pacific and Europe, while moving up the value chain. It no longer has to depend on a single market. It's spreading its risk and gaining flexibility. So when the US imposes tariffs, Ontario doesn't panic. It pivots. South of the border, though, the impacts are starting to stack up, and they go far beyond rising housing costs. Take cross-border shopping, for instance. It has slowed dramatically. Traffic over the Rainbow Bridge is down 33%, and the Peace Bridge has seen a 12% drop. This isn't just a few quiet weekends. 1/3 of customers are gone. Erie County, New York, ran the numbers. In just 1 month, it lost an estimated $4.9 million in tax revenue. That's not a blip. That's a budget problem. It means fewer public services, unfilled potholes, and real consequences for local communities. And it doesn't stop with lumber. The ripple effect is spreading across the entire construction and manufacturing sector. Steel, aluminum, copper, all slapped with a 50% levy. Half the value stripped away, while the full cost still has to be paid. Try running a construction project under those conditions, where every input suddenly costs double. That's not a challenge. It's a chokehold.